Hi, I'm Jessica Behal with Great Rivers Regional System for Addiction Care, and we are doing another installment of our This Is My Story series. And tonight we have Jason. Jason is going to tell us his story this evening. This is a story that we're excited to hear. I know there was kind of, I was telling Jason the other day, there was kind of some paths that kind of got mixed up. And so I thought he had been asked and he hadn't. And so I was like, oh, we have to get Jason to talk. So we're excited to hear Jason's story this evening. And so Jason, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I guess I have to start at the beginning. I was born to a broken home, to a single mother, in a little town called Pax, West Virginia. I grew up on the edge of what they call Paint Creek. And, from a very early age, I can remember I didn't feel like everything was right. I didn't feel like everything fit. I felt like, I was a little bit out of place. Something was just off in my life. I can remember seeing other kids, playing with their mom and their dad and talking about their mom and their dad. And, they had this picture of a family that I didn't have. Right. And, my mother, she was a very angry person. She, I know now, did the best that she felt that she could with the circumstances that they were, but she wasn't always the loving, caring, understanding parent. Some of the earliest memories that I can recall was, I spilled Kool-Aid one time, and I know I had to be younger than 4 because of where we lived at the time. And I spilled Kool-Aid, and I started crying, and I was trying my best to get the dog to clean up the Kool-Aid before my mom came in and found it. I can remember getting kicked and getting hit, screamed, and yelled at. All those kind of abusive things that you never want for your child, I can remember being part of my childhood. As far as, a father figure, I didn't really have a father. However, my father's parents stepped up and tried to be a major part of my life as much as they could to try to fill that gap. And so did my father's younger brother. My uncle was more a father figure to me than my real father was. I know now, looking back at that situation, that he wasn't ready to be a dad. He just wasn't. And unfortunately, me being a child, I had to face the consequences of his decision. And as I started to get older, my mother, she went through a few different boyfriends and things like that. And she was a true product of the 70s. Let's just put it that way. She was a party mom. I can remember parties at the house. I can remember we had, a pot plant growing in the window when I was 4 or 5 years old. And then we moved to Beckley, and a few more boyfriends later, she ended up meeting what would become my stepfather. He was a very quiet man, and he took care of my mother and he took care of me, right? He was the breadwinner. He was a hardworking guy. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was very soft-spoken, and he didn't talk a lot, but when he did, he meant what he said. But I ended up carrying some resentments with him because I felt like, I was shorted in this equation. Like, I should have had a relationship with my real father, and that never really happened. He tried to come around some when I was younger. He would come to my grandparents' house on birthdays or Christmas and come and I love you with a big present. And, I guess he cares about me. He loves me. Right. But then, I didn't have that relationship with him that I was really longing for. So I was very confused. I had a very contorted view of family and what that was. And as I got older, I still never could shake that feeling that, something's just not right in my life. Something's not working. I don't fit. Something's not fitting. And I had an older cousin that was 6 years older than me, and I kind of ended up looking up to him somewhat like an older brother. He was popular and he had friends and he listened to the cool music and had the cool clothes and stuff. And, I really looked up to him. And I can remember after my mother and stepfather got married when I was 7, and it was probably around the age of 9. My older cousin used to come over and, spend the night and stuff. And I can remember him taking me downstairs into the basement and us huffing gas together, right? And I really liked the way it smelled. I don't know why, but something about it I liked, right? And then it kind of made me feel funny, and I thought, well, that's cool too, But let's back up a little bit. At around the age of 6, because we hadn't moved into the house where my stepfather lived yet. So if my parents got married at 7, then at probably the age of 6, another older cousin of mine ends up, every time he would come over, he would take me upstairs and I would have to suffer, being molested by him. So I never told anybody because I knew it was weird and it was scary to me. And I think that I felt like, it was kind of my fault in a way. It was something that I thought that, I just don't tell anybody and this will stop, right? So with that being said, then we move forward. I'm 9. I end up huffing gas with my older cousin. And around the age of 10, molestation started with him as well. And that went on for a few years, but I guess in my young mind, I kind of adapted it as being okay because, again, he was somebody I looked up to. He was popular. He was fun to be around. He had friends, and he was older than I was, and he was a lot bigger than I was. So I just kind of dealt with it, right? And again, kept it to myself. But now I'm starting to see a pattern, right? And I'm starting to think, well, maybe this is something to do with me. Maybe this is really my fault that these things are happening. So around the age of 12, 13, the same cousin introduces me to drinking on the weekends. He's 16, 17 years old. I'm 12, 13. I think, maybe he was 3 or 4 years older than me. He introduces me to drinking on the weekends and stuff, and smoking marijuana. And when we would do that, we would go down to the river or whatever to go to a party or whatever. And I felt really super accepted, right? I felt very much part of a group. I felt socially like I fit for a change, right? Because besides, the abuse from my mother and the molesting and things like that, I wasn't a popular kid in school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have girlfriends. You know what I mean? I got picked on and bullied a lot. So when we go out on these weekend ventures, I felt like I fit. I felt like, this is where I'm at home, is when this is going on. So, move forward to, 16 years old, I get my first car, and, I'm smoking weed all the time, drinking here and there. And, I meet a girlfriend, right? And she was pretty and she was cool and people liked her. And, like, I finally felt like I had somebody that really cared about, because she wasn't hurting me with words or with anything else. And, I got some trouble, and I just got my first car. and my parents were going to take my car. And it's like, if they take my car, I can't see her, and I'm not okay without her. So I decided to run away from home. I go and pick her up in the middle of the night one night, and I take off to Virginia to my father's. You know, I hadn't really seen him a whole lot, but I thought, well, maybe if I just get away from her and get away from these people, me and this girl can have the American dream, so to speak, right? So, we take an ounce of pot, we take off. I stole a fifth of liquor from my parents and packed a small cooler with some sandwiches, and got in my mom's purse and got a few $20 bills out and took off. And we got caught. Ended up, back in West Virginia. And at this point, the relationship between me and my mother had reached such a boiling point that it was constant all day, every day, arguing, yelling. I would get, glass ashtrays thrown at me and hit with whatever was arm's length. And I ran into a guy. Actually, my older cousin, got me a fake ID, and we go to a bar. And I ran into a guy that I went to school with, and he was like, I moved out and I'm staying with roommates, and you can come stay there if you want. You just got to get a job and help kick in on the bills and stuff. And I'm like, absolutely, I'm done. By this point, my mom, let me just say that I probably wasn't the most easy to deal with child at this point. On top of her not being the best and most insightful, loving parent. With that being said, I'd already dropped out of school at this point. So it's like, what, I'm just going to get a job and I'm going to start living. And, that I found out real quick, working minimum wage, that wasn't any kind of life. I hadn't finished high school. I hadn't done anything like that. And, I, at the age of almost 18, decided to go to Job Corps. And I went to Job Corps in Virginia for right at a year. I got certified in a trade skill, and it was cool because there was a brotherhood there, but still would sneak off property every now and then because somebody would sneak some pot on the center or something. Or we had a store trip every Wednesday. We could either go to Kmart or Walmart, and they'd take us on a bus and we'd go shopping. And a lot of them would sneak over to the gas station and steal some wine or whatever. So we'd set up on the weekends and sip wine and smoke some weed. So there was always that behavior. There was always that thing inside of me that wanted me out of the present moment. I was always very agitated and uncomfortable with things the way that they were. And whenever I put a substance into my body, I didn't have that anymore. So, after that, after I got out of Job Corps, I started working. I worked a few jobs, a few relationships here and there. But, I really wasn't a steady drug user or drinker at that point. It was just something recreationally, but I knew that it really put me at ease. And I started a career in sales and was actually really good at it. So we flash forward now to around the age of 22, 23, and I suffered a back injury at work. And as a result of that back injury, I was prescribed opiate painkillers. And the first time that I put an opiate into my body, I felt like everything just melted away. Every bit of pain that I'd felt from my childhood, every insecurity, everything restless inside of me, everything irritable that I was carrying just was gone. It made me feel like I was a better person. I was easier to be around. I was, more motivated, more on task. And, you know, as time went on, those painkillers got increased. The dosages got increased. The frequency got increased. And, you know, a few broken relationships as well, you know, because I'm still trying to find validation in a woman and actually try to find some, you know, some compassion and some companionship in another person. I ended up re-injuring my back again at the age of 27. And at this time, they really kicked in, you know, the strength, so to speak. Instead of just being prescribed Lortabs, they jumped me up to, you know, oxycodones, and you know, I think it was Somas, and then eventually Klonopin, and that was it. Like, that's when everything about my life really changed. The people that I was involved with at that point were all people that, you know, did some type of drug. Normal people, quote unquote, normal people, didn't exist in my life. And the people that I would see living a normal life, like, they're doing something. Like, secretly, they're doing something. They're going home and they're getting hammered on margaritas, or they're tooting cocaine, you know, in the bathroom when their kid don't know about it, or, you know, something. They're doing something, because I would see happy families going in and out of Walmart, and you know, with smiles on their faces, and I'm thinking, you know, what's their secret? They've got to be doing something. They've got a secret, you know. At that point, I could really tell that my perception in life in general was completely different, because I had no trust in anybody. You know, you could show me a sheet of red paper and tell me it's red, and I'd say you were lying. I didn't trust anybody, you know, because everybody that I involved myself with was always out for something for themselves. You know, whether it be a ride somewhere, or, you know, getting them something, or taking something back to Walmart for them, or something. They always had an agenda of some kind. And I adapted that myself. Like, I only involved myself with certain people because I needed something from them, something. And, you know, I moved, you know, over the span of from the age of 18 to 26, I moved 13 times. I lived in 8 different states. I went all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska to Lansing, Michigan to Polk County, Florida, right, over this time period. But I always ended up back in West Virginia, because I always had, you know, my grandparents, God rest their soul, they were always there for me to fall back on, you know. And my grandfather, he tried his best to guide me and direct me, and instill some type of moral compass in me at a very early age. But I would hear about this God of the Bible that he talked about, because he was very devout in his faith, and I didn't fit that mold. You know, he was very much fire and brimstone, like, there's a bearded guy in the sky that's going to strike me with a lightning bolt as soon as I mess up, and, like, no matter what I do, I'm going to fall short anyways. You know what I mean? And besides that, like, if he really loved me and cared about me that much, why did I have to go through all the horrible things that I suffered through, you know, the first half of my life? Like, God doesn't care about me. I don't care about him. You want to go pray for him, you go pray. Like, I got stuff to do. I need to go get high. And then that's just where I was. I was very jaded and very bitter. So I ended up meeting a woman, and we were on and off for nearly 10 years. And it was a very toxic relationship from the beginning. And we fed into each other's BS. We used each other as an excuse to do what the other wanted to do. And that went on, you know, and it got pretty bad. And I ended up arrested many times. Ended up on the fugitive files. Husband and wife walk out of Walmart with 3 TVs. Like, that was a great idea, I thought, just to walk out with not 1 or 2, but 3 TVs. Nobody's going to notice. And that didn't that didn't plan out. But eventually she got pregnant, and I wanted to not do the same things that my father did. I wanted it to be a legitimate child, not illegitimate. I wanted to do it the right way. But again, my motives weren't where they really should be, because I couldn't understand how to truly love someone else because I hated myself. And I just said, I'm not going to fail at being a father. I don't care what happens. Like, I'm not going to put him through that. He's going to know who I am. He's going to know me. I'm going to be a part of his life. I'm going to do everything I can for him. Even though I couldn't hold down a job and pay my bills, right? I'm going to be like super dad. And, really I thought, okay, well, she's pregnant. Maybe this will fix the problems in our relationship. Like, maybe this is what we were lacking, having a kid will fix us. And, of course, that wasn't the case either. So about 9 months into our marriage, I walked in on her with someone else. And our son, he was just a baby, and he was in the car seat. And I don't know how I worded it, but I told her that I couldn't be married to her anymore. But that didn't mean we couldn't be together, and that didn't mean that we couldn't raise our son together. But I consciously couldn't be married any longer. So we divorced, and she signed full custody of our son to me. And still we're living in complete chaos. My grandfather looked at that little boy the way he used to look at me when I was a kid, and he didn't look at me like that anymore. When my grandfather looked at me, he saw disappointment, failure, I know. And when he looked at my son, he looked and he saw hope and promise and a future. And he did everything that he could to try to help my son. But through that, he had to help me. And, he would bring over huge, huge things of formula and packs of diapers and pay the rent and make sure the water didn't get shut off and things like that. And, I remember it was the first year of my son's life when we were in a small apartment in Beckley, and super hot, no air conditioning, really hot this year. My grandfather went and bought us an air conditioner. Air conditioner sitting in the window, and after about 2 weeks of it keeping the apartment nice and cool, we ran every hustle we knew to run. We didn't have any other options to get what we wanted. So all of a sudden, having a nice, comfortable, cool apartment wasn't that important anymore. So let's box it up. Let's take it back, and here it is with a 9-month-old baby in the house. And I'm more concerned with getting high than I am keeping him comfortable. Well, Granddad brought another huge can of formula, and I've still got 4 sitting there that the baby hasn't touched yet. So I'm sure we could take 2 of them back and get a Walmart gift card and trade that for a fix today, because then I started to really feel what it was to be, dope, sick, and withdrawal. And I didn't want to feel that. I didn't want to feel anything anymore. I didn't want to face myself. I didn't want to, face the things that I'd done at this point. I didn't want to face the failed marriage. Her cheating on me really added a lot to the question of my self-worth. You know, I already carried a lot of baggage from, my mother's abuse and being, sexually abused as a child, and my father not being around. And I always felt like there was something wrong with me. So when my wife cheats on me, like, that just adds to the heap, you know what I mean? And, but still, yet I didn't want to end that relationship because I felt like, well, if I just do this differently or that differently, I can fix it. Like, if we just try a little bit harder, we don't do that, or, somehow I'm going to manage this because I don't want to fail. Like, it wasn't that I truly loved her. It was that I truly hated the idea of being alone. And even though we had a child together, like, she was not the person that I needed to be with. It's just plain and simple. Like, we did not need to be together. But I wanted to hold on to that as long as I could. So we kept going. By this time, I'm doing heroin, and I've converted over to the needle and, injecting the pills because get you high faster, right? Get you a lot higher for the same amount that you're using. So let's do that. And at one point I actually thought, okay, I don't want to feel the withdrawals, but I noticed if I'm doing speed of any kind, like if I'm on cocaine, I don't feel the withdrawals from opiates. So let's try that. Like, I can get off the opiates if I do coke. Okay. No. Awful. Like, you just trade one for another, but in your mind, you're really trying to find a way to get high successfully. And that's really what it boiled down to for me. Was I wanted to be able to get high and not feel who I am, where I am, and what I am. But I don't want to suffer the consequences that come along with that. So this whole time I'm trying to figure out a way to use successfully. And of course, things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. I keep getting arrested and pulled over, and I got 11 driving on suspendeds within 60 days. Lost my license, of course, and, living that lifestyle, you stack the deck against yourself from being able to get out of it because you create these hurdles for yourself, but you don't realize it at the time. And 2013, we finally split for good, and I went out one night. I had a girlfriend. She fell asleep. My son's 2 years old. He falls asleep. There's a friend of mine over drinking. We decide we're going to go out and keep drinking. So I'm already on probation from the TV theft. And he and I go out in the middle of the night. He gets a flat tire. And we end up breaking down and end up getting into a physical altercation with, somebody that lived right there where we broke down. And the person got beat, like, really bad. And then we both take off and leave the truck. Like, that was a great idea. They'll never figure out who it was. I'm walking home, you walk home. Wasn't too long that I was picked up by the Raleigh County Sheriffs, and they returned said beating that we had given out. And, I was thrown a lifeline. After sitting in jail for about 4 months, I went for sentencing, and they offered me home confinement and an extra year probation after the home confinement. So when this happened, my son went to the custody of the state. My parents weren't in a position to take him. My grandparents were too old to keep him. And he went into the custody of the state, and they placed him in a home, and I didn't know where he was. No clue. And I started going through that process of jumping through those hoops to try to fulfill, the requirements that CPS asked of me. And I had to go through, supervised visits at the DHHR in a small room behind a two-way mirror, right? But of course, I did that, and that grew, and eventually we ended up being able to go to the park with the presence of a social worker, but it had to be in eyesight. I couldn't take my own kid to the bathroom. that kind of thing. It was a very demeaning process as a parent because I loved my son. But I couldn't get far enough over myself to truly be the father that he needed. And I didn't see that. But I told myself when I went to jail that time, because I was actually looking at some serious time, God, just get me out of this and I'll be the best father and I'll never go back. I'll never use again. I'm done. Like, I've had enough. At this point, I'm 32 years old. Like, I'm done, And I did good for a while. I got out on home confinement. I went to my grandparents' house. I kept up with the CPS case, with the visits and everything. I did everything the court asked me to. And then they ended up returning custody, 100% custody to me. And then my grandmother passed away. That hit me really hard because she was the female in my life that did nurture and love and care for me and bounce me on her knee and sing to me as a little boy. And she was gone. And so then it was just, Christian and I, my son Christian and I, and my grandfather. And 6 months later, my grandfather died. So then it's just me and Christian. And we're in this shell of a house that I basically grew up in. And they weren't there anymore. My life jacket was gone. So I'm 32 years old with no formal education, no driver's license, thousands of dollars owed in fines to get my license back, a criminal record, a convicted felon, and a single father with no job and no income. And, the thing is, when you get into that lifestyle, you really start to limit your options of what you can do. And, when I got out on home confinement, where are you going to get a job at? A restaurant, because the sad thing is, the majority of staff at most restaurants are people that's been in trouble with the law, people that don't have formal education, people that are on probation or on parole. You get that type of atmosphere working in food service. You just do. It's just what it is, because it's cheap labor. It's cheap labor, And through that job that I got while I was on home confinement, eventually they're smoking weed out back. Maybe if I just hit it a couple times, and then it's like, well, this person had some pills. Man, I haven't done a painkiller in months. If I just do one, I can just do one and it'll be fine. And the next thing you know, I'm going with people to the pharmacy to pay for them to get their script filled so they'll give me, half the pills, right? I'm right back in it. So after my grandmother and grandfather died, here I am at, hopeless by myself. I'm still in the family home. The rest of the family agreed to let me stay there, but what can I really do for myself? The uncle that I spoke of earlier, he stepped up and he's like, I know to take care of that child, I have to help take care of you first. So he took care of my driver's license for me, got my fines paid. That was $5,700 by the time we paid fines and reinstatement fees to get my license back. And he was going to give me my grandfather's car, and they were going to allow me to stay in the house. But of course, I had to find a job and things like that. But at this point in my mind, I'm in my 30s. My life is so far gone and so destroyed, and I am so destroyed as a person inside. And I've lived this life for so long that that's the only life I really knew. You know, I didn't know how to be a normal person or what a normal person really was. Again, I thought everybody I considered normal had a secret. You know what I mean? And working in that restaurant, I met what I thought was a friend, right? And he would start coming over after my grandparents had passed, and we'd drink some and smoke weed and do some pills and this and this and this and this and this. And you know, one day he's like, you know, you can make your own drugs, right? And I'm like, really? Do tell. Well, come to find out, he had already did a 4-year bid for a meth lab. That's why I met him, because he was on work release to the restaurant that we worked at together. And I'm like, you mean to tell me that I don't have to go to some parking lot, wait on somebody that may or may not show up, or give somebody my money that may or may not rip me off? And, you know, like, I don't have to do any of that? He's like, no, we just need to go to the hardware store. Cool, let's do that. And here we go. We start cooking meth. And for the next nearly 4 months of my life, I really found out what complete insanity was. You know, I dwindled down to right at 120 pounds, you know, 110, 120 pounds. I'm 210 pounds now, you know. I would go days without food, without sleeping, you know. I would make sure that I kept enough sense about me to, oh, Christian needs to have breakfast, right? Well, I haven't slept in 4 days. Of course, I'm awake. Let me go ahead and make him some breakfast, you know. But of course, it was a bowl of cereal or something quick, but make sure that he had food in him. Make him a sandwich for lunch, something to microwave for dinner, you know. And it was complete insanity. You know, you see things, you hear things, you lose grip with actual reality. Things start getting real sketchy after about 3 days with no sleep, you know. And at one point I went, I know, 11 days without sleeping. And then when I would sleep, it's like you just shut down. Like you don't get sleepy and lay down. Like you're sitting here 1 second, the next second you're flat on your face. You're completely out. Your body just, you shut down. And 3 or 4 hours later, you pop up like nothing happened. You're ready to go again, you know. And the cops showed up at my house because they got what they said was an anonymous tip. And when they showed up, there were 6 adults, there were 3 children, and there were 4 active meth labs in the house, all at once. And this had went on for so long that I wanted it to stop. Like, I was wore out, and I knew that it was killing me. But I didn't know how to get it to stop, because now at this point, these people are basically living with me, you know, and we're just feeding each other's addiction. And, you know what I mean? Like, it's just complete chaos. And my little boy, you know, CPS showed up then, of course. And my little boy was 4. He was not quite 5 yet. He'd been 5 a month later. And there's, you know, 4 police agencies. There's probably 30 cop cars covering the whole neighborhood. And my little boy was walking to the car through the yard that night. And he turned and he looked at me. He said, "Daddy, I love you. I'll never forget you." And that has stayed with me, and it'll stay with me for the rest of my life, because he had accepted that he'd never see his dad again. And they put me in the cop car, and they were taking me, you know, in for processing. And I can remember driving down the road, and I didn't know what to expect. I knew that my life would be forever changed, but I was so relieved that it was finally over. The feeling of relief that this complete pandemonium that I've been living in, it's over with, was overwhelming. And, I got charged with 4 felony counts and was looking at 6 to 30 years on these charges. And there was nobody to call. My life jacket was no longer there. My grandparents were no longer around. My mother, while she was around, they were never really in a position to be able to, help me in any way. And as far as the rest of my family, my uncle, of course, I just got I got the family house condemned. So they really didn't want anything to do with me. And I remember my attorney coming in for the first time, and the first thing out of my mouth was, I don't know what's going to happen, but I need help. And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I don't know, but I need help. Like, I can't live the way I've been living anymore." So finally, as a condition of bond, they bonded me to Recovery Point of Huntington in 2015. And it was the first time I'd ever heard what recovery is. I'd heard about recovery, but I thought that AA was a bunch of old washed up drunks sitting around chain smoking, complaining about their problems. I thought that NA was people that just crawled out of the bathroom, with a fresh needle mark on their arm. Like, I didn't know what the Rooms of Recovery or a 12-step program was. And I get there and there's people telling me they love me. And "We're glad you're here, man." And they're smiling and they're hugging each other, right? And I'm thinking, you guys are drunk. Like, there's something going on with y'all too. Like, y'all got a secret for real, But after I stayed there for a little while and I started really watching their video match their audio, like, they were walking out what they were saying. And they were happy. And they would tell their stories, and they would tell my story out of their mouths, right? Their circumstances may have been a little different. Their situations may have varied a little from mine. But when they talk about how they felt, about being lost, feeling unloved, feeling, unworthy, not having a sense of self-worth, when they talked about the terrible things that they did and the hearts that they broke and, the chaos that they caused in other people's lives, like, that made sense to me. And then they talked about a change. They talked about a solution. And it interested me. I said, well, if they're telling the truth, and it looks like they are, and that works for them, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this could work for me too. And I started, working steps. And, I got a sponsor, and, I started to establish, a support system with these guys, and it turned into a brotherhood. And, I stayed there 13 months in total. And through this process, I was reconnected with, I refer to as my sister, right? She's the closest thing God ever gave me to a sister. But, I was reconnected with her, and she had came up to Huntington and taken me out to lunch a few times. And, I reached out to her near the end of that program, and she said, you can come stay here until you get on your feet, And I stayed with her for about 8 months, and I got the job and I got the car, right? And through this process, like, I was able to start the whole CPS process over again. Like, social workers are bringing my child to Huntington. Now, at this point, he's placed with my mother, right? So at least I knew where he was. But I started jumping through all those same hoops all over again. And, eventually they're letting me have overnight visits. They're bringing him to, my sister's, and he's staying the night with me. And, I was super grateful, right? This is awesome. And, God's been so good to me. And, I've got this great network of people. But, deep down inside, like, I still had that desire to use. even though I'd had all this recovery knowledge and knowledge of what the steps were, and I had people in my life that I could lean on, and a support group, and I had a sponsor and all these things, right? Like, I still had that desire because I thought that I could do it successfully. I still thought I could do it successfully. So I lasted a few months until I got a place. I got the car, like my uncle made good on his word. He ended up giving me my grandfather's car after I completed this program, right? I got the job, and then I secured housing. And the day that I got my place, now this is 1 week to the day before they're going to return custody of my son to me. We were having the final disposition hearing 1 week later. The day that I got my house, like, I locked the door and I cooked methamphetamine for 5 days straight. After being clean and sober 18 months, going through long-term intensive inpatient treatment, jumping through all the hoops of CPS, my little boy's coming home, right? The literature that we read in recovery, there's a story that says, there wasn't a cloud on the horizon, right? And that's where I was. But I still thought I could do it successfully. I thought that I could be the exception. So I relapsed hard, and I'm still on probation, and my PO tells me, you need to go back to Recovery Point. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that again. Let's try something different. He's like, well, you can go to jail. And I'm like, let's go back to Recovery Point. So I go back to Recovery Point, and the huge dose of humility that I was lacking in my recovery process was finally handed to me when I walked through the front doors of the program that I had been at teaching classes 2 weeks before that. And here I walk in to get a detox bed. The things that they told me was, go to meetings, read your literature, call your sponsor, have a support group, give back, help others. Like, all that stuff sounded real good. And I did it because that's what I was told to do. What I didn't understand is that it's what I absolutely needed to do. So I went through what they call refocus, and I was there for a few months, and I got back out and I started the whole process over again. The CPS visits, the back staying with my sister, the looking for the job, right? But this time, something had happened inside of me that didn't happen before. This time, I knew exactly where drugs and alcohol would take me without question. Not just a little bit. Like, our literature also says once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Once an addict, always an addict, right? What that means is that if I pick up a drink, I will drink like an alcoholic. If I pick up a drug of any kind, I will use like an addict. I won't do just one or two or a little bit of anything, right? I can't. I know today I can honestly say I can't do it successfully. And on top of that, there's nothing about that life that has anything to offer me at this point. I've maintained my sobriety now for over 3 years. I have full and sole custody of my son. He's been home for over 2 years. August, I will be at the same employer for 3 years. I've had the same cell phone number for over 3 years. And that small thing right there's a big deal to a person that's lived a life like I have, going from one Obama phone to another, right? And on top of all that, I've met an amazing woman and recently was married, right? Which was never in the cards for me. After all these broken relationships, letdowns, all this pain, all this self-seeking and self-validation that always came up empty-handed and always ended up me being hurt worse in the long run. Being married and having a loving relationship was something that was never going to happen to me. but I can say today that I'm happily married to an amazing woman that understands me and loves me for who I am. We bought a home, like we bought a house. You know, that would have never happened to me. That's something that wasn't in the cards for me. And I have to give credit to God in my recovery, because me left to my own devices, I don't make sound decisions, right? Because I have a mindset that tells me I need more of everything, whether it be money, drugs, clothes, women, whatever. Like, I need more of everything. And now that I apply a 12-step recovery program to my life every day, and I don't just use one piece of what recovery's taught me, you know, call your sponsor, read her literature, go to meetings, right? Help other people. No one thing in that equation keeps me sober today. It's all of them. It's all of them. I have to use every tool that I've been given through recovery if I intend to stay clean and sober. And I have to keep God first in my life. You know, I used to look and say, you know, I'll never be a church person, right? Because again, church was the box that my grandfather said that I was supposed to fit in, and I didn't, right? And now I realize today that it's not about being a church person. It's about having peace in my heart and a relationship with a God that I can understand and know that I don't run the universe, right? And that as long as I'm doing the right thing and trying to put other people ahead of myself, then my life seems to work out better every time. I don't know why that works, and I don't know how it works, but it does. The more that I give back and the more that I actually show compassion and try to help others, the more life reciprocates that to me. And today my life is leaps and bounds better than anything I could have ever imagined. It continues to be blessed and more fulfilling every day. And this is what God in recovery is good did for me. So I don't know if that helps anybody, but that's my story, and I hope it helps somebody.
Absolutely. Jason, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Jason, will you do me a really quick favor?
Sure.
So we talked to your wife a few weeks ago, and she
Yeah.
shared her story. And she talked a little bit about More Than Addiction, but how do you play a role in the More Than Addiction? Because I know that we've seen you guys out and about, and a lot of times it's the two of you. But what would you say More Than Addiction is the nonprofit that she and some friends have started, but you also go out to the events when More Than Addiction is there. So what has that meant to you, the More Than Addiction program, and that outreach ministry that they have started?
So More Than Addiction really focuses on the person being more than what you see, right? So often they saw that, you know, people were remembered for their horror stories. You know, they lost loved ones to overdose. And after they were gone, everybody talked about how tragic and how horrible it was and all the bad things that they did before they died. And, you know, they didn't remember the person. They didn't remember who those people were. They didn't talk about who those people were outside of their addiction, right? And that resonated through me because, you know, through this recovery process, I've lost friends. I've lost people that I've met along this journey to overdose due to relapse. And, you know, they were more than that relapse. They were more than their addiction. And, you know, the whole vision behind More Than Addiction is to spark compassion in people, to try to stomp out the stigma that is, you know, revolved around what addiction is, and to try to, you know, change the narrative, right? To talk about these people as people and not as their actions while actively using. So, you know, when I saw and heard about this, I said, you know what? This is something that I absolutely have to be a part of, because the way that I view it today is you're either part of the problem or the solution. There's no middle of the road when it comes to addiction. You know, if you say, well, it's not in my backyard or it's not in my family, and you have a very hands-off approach to it, guess what? You're still feeding into the stigma by not acknowledging it or not wanting to talk about it. Like, you feed the stigma just by having the hands-off approach. So you either have to be part of the solution or you contribute to the problem. And with that being said, you know, I feel it's important for me to get out there as much as I can and be able to spread the message of what More Than Addiction stands for and tell them how I'm more than addiction today, because my addiction, you know, it doesn't dictate my decisions today. It doesn't dictate my ability as a father, my ability as a husband, as a friend, right? I am an addict in recovery, plain and simple, but that's not who I am. I'm more than that. And people need to realize that, you know, they are as well, right? And if I can share myself, if I can get out there and I can meet people and I can relate to them and I can say, I've been where you're at and I'm not there anymore. Or, you know, I can hear from the distraught mother that doesn't know how to help her child and let her know that it's not her fault, right? No matter how much she loves her child and knows that, you know, that's not her child anymore, I can relate to the helplessness, right? I understand. And it's not your fault. Like, I have a purpose and I have to help people. I have to be part of this solution. Recently, we started a More Than Addiction Live video series on Thursday nights at 7. And, you know, not only are we talking with people in recovery, we're talking with family members that have been affected by people in active addiction. We try to showcase different resources that are available out there today. And this was really prompted by the whole COVID-19 scare that happened when, you know, meetings aren't readily available, right? And people don't know what resources are out there and they need somebody just to be able to relate to. So I've tried to stay involved as much as I possibly can to affect change anywhere possible, to be part of the solution. And that's where I have to be today.
That's awesome. That's actually how I met Jason. We with Great Rivers, we've set up many a booths beside one another over the last year. I think September we were probably together every weekend.
Yeah.
This past September for Recovery Month. So, and I'm sure this coming September will be the same. But Jason, we want to thank you so much for telling your story. I really, really appreciate it. I will say, if you are ever out at an event and you see the More Than Addiction table, you can more than likely guarantee that Jason will be there. And so I strongly encourage you to head over and talk with him. He is just, what you see right here is what you get when you're in person as well. He's very genuine. And I'm just very thankful to be able to talk with you this evening. And so thank you so much. If you or someone you know would like to tell your story of recovery, then please reach out to us. We are still continuing this series as long as people want to tell their story. Also, if you want to get in contact with Jason, maybe you have some questions for him, reach out to us via our Facebook page, or you can reach out directly to Jason, and I'm sure he would love to talk to you. But other than that, that's all we have for this evening. That's all we have for this evening. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties with my phone. But thank you guys so much, and be on the lookout for more This Is Our Stories.